Hello, folks. Welcome back. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania. The Department of State's South Africa Human Rights Report for 2024 has been publicly released. It's out there. The Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, DRL, published this. Now, here's my analysis and some commentary on this report, which is no doubt going to get a lot of tongues wagging in South Africa, in the political class, in social media, Chatterai, and all the others who think they're subject matter experts on this sort of thing. So the publicly released version, it's short on details, especially the inclusion of damning specifics about racial discrimination. And I'm not sure why the Washington Post felt the need to discredit the report. It's not anywhere near as damaging as it could have been. But then again, this is the version released to the public. Does an internal or classified version expose more detail for policymakers? This is something we don't know. Only people inside the government can tell us that. The odd thing about this is that the tenor of the report is incongruent with the tweets that the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor published last week, which gave the clear impression that the forthcoming report on human rights would be devastating for the African National Congress-led government. The report will no doubt provoke denials and whataboutism from South African politicians. In fact, SABC journalist Sherwin Bryce Peace posted a tweet at 23:36 local South Africa time claiming that DIRCO had rejected the report. Now, the only problem with that claim is that there's no posting on the DIRCO website nor on their X account commenting on the report, even now, hours later. So how he came by that publicly available information at nearly midnight is of interest to me, because it's not publicly available. Peace claims that DIRCO noted that the report came from a nation that had exited the United Nations Human Rights Council and pointed to the documented concerns about human rights in the United States, citing the treatment of refugees and breaches in due process by its own agencies, such as ICE. Whataboutism, distractions, and propaganda. This is hardly a surprise. Not one of those is a valid statement. The U.S. did exit the Human Rights Council. You know why? Because Iran and Myanmar were included, massive human rights violators. The Human Rights Council is a joke when you put transgressors on it. While the report is damning, it is not quite devastating, folks. The report at times reads as a wishy-washy PC report intended to not upset the apple cart rather than a genuine report on the human rights situation. Now, there were several unsubstantiated claims that Afrikaner groups had influenced this report, but a thorough reading of the public report would appear to belie those claims. Open sources mentioned in the report include the South African Human Rights Commission, Agence France-Presse, the French press agency, Jewish groups, Amnesty International, and others, not AfriForum, Solidarity, or Lex Libertas. Now, the report is accurate, but it's incomplete. There's no mention of BELA, NHI, the Employment Equity Act, the Black Tax, or any of the 145 discriminatory race-based laws. The most damaging portions of the report include the half-page executive summary, extrajudicial killings, freedom of the press, physical attacks, imprisonment and pressure, government censorship, prolonged detention without charges, torture, and acts of anti-Semitism. And I'll read portions of the report to you now. This is the executive summary here. It's rather brief, and I'll mention a few of the other sections of the report. The human rights situation in South Africa significantly worsened during the year with the signing of the Expropriation bill on December 20th. South Africa took substantially worrying steps towards land expropriation of Afrikaners and further abuses against racial minorities in the country. Significant human rights issues included credible reports of arbitrary or unlawful killings, arbitrary arrest or detention, and the repression of racial minorities. The government did not take credible steps to investigate, prosecute, or punish officials who committed human rights abuses, including inflammatory racial rhetoric against Afrikaners and other racial minorities, or violence against racial minorities. And that's a reference to Julius Malema in the Economic Freedom Fighter. So there's a number of portions in this report that are damning, but much of it's level-headed and very fair to South Africa. So this will be dismissed, of course, by the government, but it's accurate. If anything, it's tame. According to data compiled by Agence France-Presse, there were 447 murders on farms and small holdings between October 2023 and September 2024. In recent years, extremist political party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, encouraged attacks on Afrikaner farmers, reviving use of the song Kill the Boer at its rallies and otherwise inciting violence. Yep. And then also mentions freedom of the press and the president signing the hate speech law, which suppresses freedom of speech, although civil societies and human rights groups viewed it as a positive step. Physical attacks, imprisonment, and pressure, including intimidation by authorities against journalists, censorship by the government, trying to force the media not to comment on them. But again, many pages here are quite tame in this report, and it's not nearly as devastating as a lot of people thought it might be, and as the Washington Post tried to give the impression when they tried to discredit it. The comments about wage and labor laws and the practices for labor, freedom of association, assembly, ability to form unions, it's all accurate and correct and fair. The biggest condemnation here is it says that the government doesn't enforce the laws effectively. It cannot effectively enforce the laws in all sectors, and there are frequent violations in the mining sector, and compensation for injuries were erratic and slow. Also, some complaints about small farm holdings and people working long days. Then the really serious stuff comes: prolonged detention without charges. There's many of these cases here. In fact, the South African police report itself from April 2023 to March of 2024 stated there were 15,139 complaints of unlawful arrest and detention. That's what they admit. But the biggest concern here is the lengthy pretrial detention that's common. People are locked up without being prosecuted or even being charged. 176 days is the average time that people are locked up in pretrial detention without even being charged. That's insane. You can't do that in America. And the reasons for this pretrial detention include insufficient evidence for prosecution. Then why do you arrest somebody if you don't have evidence for the prosecution? Overburdened courts, poor case preparation, irregular access to public defenders, and prohibitively high bail amounts. I dispute that. I've seen that bail amounts tend to be high only for minority South Africans, particularly white South Africans. Others get over scot-free for egregious crimes. They pay virtually nothing for bail and get out. Fewer than 60% of those who are even charged are actually convicted. And pretrial detention often exceeded the maximum sentence for the alleged crime. So people are locked up without a trial for extended periods of time, imprisoned. If they are charged and they are convicted, they wind up spending more time in jail, pretrial confinement, than the actual criminal charge would have resulted in. And one of the worst sections here is torture, cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment and punishment, talking about torture by police, and it's quite bad. And this section also talks about the Expropriation Bill, and I'll cover that now. Expropriation Bill enacted by the President as Expropriation Act 13 of 2024 was signed after nearly 20 years of debate, legal challenges, and discussions around land reform, primarily because the act would permit the government to expropriate land without compensation under certain conditions. This act would enable the government to seize ethnic minority Afrikaners' agricultural property without compensation, following countless government policies designed to dismantle equal opportunity in employment, education, and business, and extreme rhetoric and government actions fueling disproportionate violence against racially disfavored landowners. Yeah, that's all fine and dandy, but that's just boilerplate taken from the president's executive order, and it will disappoint many people because it doesn't state the case. The case is the Expropriation Act is to be used as a political tool to silence opponents of the government. That's the real purpose of it. And it affects all South Africans, not simply black South Africans. It includes allegations of sexual exploitation by the SANDF in the DRC, then poor treatment of refugees and asylum seekers, forced marriage of minor girls, poor asylum standards, and then one of the most damning portions of this report is on page 18 and page 19, and this is treatment of Jews in South Africa. The number of Jews has declined from 250,000 to just 52,000 over the past number of years, and includes a number of anti-Semitic attacks against Jews and what's been happening, and the encouragement of this by government officials. During the year, increasing anti-Zionist and related anti-Semitic rhetoric at high levels of government emboldened public anti-Semitic actions. Yeah, and that's the bottom line. But all in all, the report is not nearly as damning as the Washington Post would have led us to believe, or the tweets that were published by the folks last week would lead us to believe. So it's not a nothing burger, but it's not the game changer people believe it is. What I do believe this report will do is give impetus to Representative Ronnie Jackson's bill once the House reconvenes after their summer recess. It will give impetus. This report will be discussed on the floor of the House and likely lead to a vote that will go towards assessing the relationship with South Africa and particularly possibly sanctioning senior leaders of the ANC and the GNU for their actions that have led to this report and to the circumstance in South Africa. So there's analysis of the report with some segments read. It's not the bone-crushing report that many feared it would be or hoped it would be, but nonetheless, the South African government and their politicians will come with whataboutism and denials and what America does this. None of that's germane. This is a report about South Africa. It's factually correct. It relies on sources and not the sources that many people claimed. Publicly available trusted sources like Amnesty International and others. It could have been much worse. And potentially, a report that's inside the government may very well be much worse. What say you, South Africa? What say you, world? Cheers.